Imagine a community of families, generations of people who built their lives in a place that felt like home, only for it to be swallowed by the waters of a man-made lake. This is the tragic story of the Black communities that once thrived near Lake Lanier. Before this lake existed, there was a vibrant network of towns, schools, and businesses, communities that were erased to make room for a recreational paradise. The tale of what happened to these communities is a story of loss, resilience, and the fight to preserve a history that's been buried beneath the water's surface. Lake Lanier, located in Georgia, is now one of the most popular tourist destinations in the state, drawing millions of visitors each year. Its serene waters are filled with boats, jet skis, and vacationers soaking in the sun. However, beneath the beauty of the lake lies a history that few people know about, a history that's hidden in the deep, dark waters. Before the lake's creation in the 1950s, the land was home to several Black communities, including the town of Oscarville, which was thriving with families and businesses. The government's decision to create Lake Lanier was made for the purpose of flood control, water supply, and hydroelectric power. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers flooded over 55,000 acres of land to form the lake, but they did not just flood the earth. They flooded the lives of hundreds of Black families. Oscarville, along with other communities like it, was forced to abandon everything they knew. Homes, schools, and churches, everything that made these communities feel like home, was destroyed. Families were given a pittance in compensation for their land, but it was nowhere near what they had lost. The forced relocation of these families wasn't just a matter of losing property, it was the destruction of a way of life. Many of these families had lived in the area for generations. Their ties to the land were not just physical, they were emotional, cultural, and spiritual. For them, this land was more than just a place to live. It was a place of heritage, where they had built their families and communities from the ground up. And when they were told to leave, they left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. As we look at the history of these communities, we must acknowledge the racial dynamics at play. Oscarville was a prosperous Black community, and the destruction of it was not merely the result of an infrastructure project. It was an act of erasure. During a time of racial tension in the South, the uprooting of these communities was not just about making way for a lake. It was about silencing the success and existence of Black Americans in a region where segregation and racism were rampant. But the destruction of Oscarville and other communities wasn't just about what was physically lost. It was about the emotional trauma that came with being forced off the land. Imagine living in a place for your whole life, only to have it taken from you. Imagine the heartbreak of seeing your home, your community, and your history disappear under a blanket of water. The emotional scars of this loss are something that still linger in the descendants of those who were displaced. For many years, the history of these communities was ignored, forgotten, or erased. People would visit Lake Lanier, enjoying its waters and recreational activities without knowing the tragic history beneath their feet. The stories of the Black families who once lived there were silenced, their memories buried under the surface of the lake. But as time has passed, more and more people are beginning to recognize the injustice that occurred. The descendants of those displaced are speaking out, telling the stories that were long forgotten. The journey of healing for these families is far from over. There's still a deep sense of loss that cannot be erased. But there is also a sense of resilience, a determination to ensure that their ancestors' stories are not lost forever. The history of the Black communities near Lake Lanier is a history of survival, strength, and perseverance. Despite the devastation that was wrought upon them, the people of Oscarville and other affected communities are finding ways to keep their legacy alive. In recent years, there has been a push for recognition and justice for the families who were displaced by the creation of Lake Lanier. Activists, descendants, and local leaders are working to raise awareness about the history of these communities. They are fighting for the acknowledgement of the wrongs that were done to their ancestors and for the creation of memorials and public spaces where the history of these lost communities can be shared. There is a growing movement to ensure that future generations understand the importance of remembering this history. It's essential that we look at this history not just as a story of the past, but as a story that continues to impact the present. The descendants of those displaced still feel the effects of what happened all those years ago. The trauma of losing a home, a community, and a way of life cannot be easily erased. The land that was once home to vibrant Black communities is now a popular spot for leisure, but the ghosts of those who were forced to leave still haunt the place. As we reflect on the legacy of these lost communities, we must also think about the broader implications of their displacement. What does it mean to erase the history of marginalized communities for the sake of progress? The creation of Lake Lanier was a tragic example of how Black communities were repeatedly erased in the name of development. This history is not just about the past, it's about how we choose to remember and recognize the struggles and triumphs of those who came before us. The legacy of the Black communities near Lake Lanier is one of strength, resilience, and survival. Though their homes were lost, their stories live on. The fight for recognition and justice is ongoing, and as more people learn about the history of these communities, the more they can understand the importance of honoring their legacy. The descendants of those displaced are keeping their ancestors' stories alive, ensuring that their voices are heard and their history is remembered. We must ask ourselves, what can we do to help preserve this history? How can we ensure that the stories of the Black families who were displaced from Lake Lanier are not forgotten? One way is through education, teaching future generations about the history that has been hidden for so long. Another way is through recognition, creating spaces where the memory of these communities can be honored. The lake may have erased the physical traces of these communities, but their spirit remains. As we wrap up this section of the story, remember that the history of Lake Lanier is more than just the story of a man-made lake. It is the story of a people whose lives were disrupted by forces beyond their control. It is the story of families who were forced to leave everything behind, yet still managed to survive. It is a story of resilience, and it's a story that needs to be told. Stay tuned for the second part of this video, where we'll explore the ongoing fight for justice and recognition, as well as the efforts being made to ensure that the history of these lost communities is never forgotten. If you've been moved by this story, hit the like button, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe for more content that dives into the untold stories of our past. The fight for justice and recognition of the Black communities displaced by the creation of Lake Lanier is a battle that continues to this day. While many may see the lake as a symbol of leisure and recreation, for those who know its history, it is a reminder of a painful past. The descendants of the families who lived near the lake are still fighting to ensure that the story of their ancestors is not forgotten. For years, the people of Oscarville and other affected communities were silenced, their voices drowned out by the floodwaters that claimed their homes. The trauma of displacement left scars that time has not healed. But today, the descendants of those who were forced to leave are speaking out, demanding that their history be acknowledged. These efforts to preserve the memory of the lost communities are a crucial step in healing the wounds of the past. One of the most powerful ways to honor the legacy of these communities is through education. Teaching the history of the Black families who were displaced by the creation of Lake Lanier is essential for future generations. Schools, universities, and local organizations have a responsibility to ensure that this history is included in the narrative of the area. By bringing this story to light, we not only honor the memory of those who were displaced, but also ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten. Another important aspect of the fight for recognition is the creation of memorials and public spaces where the history of these communities can be shared. The land around Lake Lanier holds the stories of the people who once lived there, and it is vital that those stories be told. Local governments, activists, and community leaders are working to create spaces where the contributions of these Black communities can be remembered. Memorials, plaques, and educational centers dedicated to the lost communities can help raise awareness and promote understanding. For the descendants of those displaced, the fight for justice goes beyond simply remembering the past. It is about ensuring that the wrongs of the past are acknowledged and that future generations are given the tools to build a more just and equitable society. The creation of Lake Lanier was not just a physical transformation of the land, it was a cultural erasure. The communities that were displaced were not just losing their homes, they were losing their identity. To heal, we must first recognize the wrong that was done. In recent years, there has been growing awareness about the history of these lost communities, thanks in part to the efforts of advocacy groups and individuals passionate about preserving this history. The descendants of the people who lived near Lake Lanier have been speaking out at local government meetings, sharing their family stories and pushing for changes. Their voices are becoming louder, and their calls for justice are being heard. But the journey is far from over. The memory of Oscarville and other Black communities near Lake Lanier is a vital part of American history, and it is essential that we acknowledge it. By doing so, we not only honor the lives of those who were displaced, but also take a step toward reconciliation and healing. Recognizing the history of these lost communities is not just an act of remembrance, it is an act of justice. As the fight for recognition continues, there is hope that the future will bring more opportunities for healing. The descendants of those who were displaced are determined to ensure that their ancestors' stories are told, and that the legacy of these communities is preserved for future generations. They are working to ensure that their history is not forgotten, and that the injustice of the past is acknowledged. If you've been moved by the stories of these lost communities, please give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about history, justice, and the fight for recognition. We will continue to bring these untold stories to light, because it is through understanding the past that we can build a better future.